thank you so much for flying all the way from Arizona to be with us today. How's the jet lag going?
I feel great, thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, he looks pretty good, doesn't he? Wait till 3 o'clock. Excellent. Well, once again, we thought you might enjoy these sessions to get some insights from the professions leaders. And of course, Tom is the CEO of the Institute of Supply Management. And once again, has been a big supporter of what we've done from the minute that we started Procurious. So, you know, once again, I think, Tom, that shows a lot of leadership and hopefully your intuition for great ideas. So, look, when ISM has some fantastic conferences, they're some of the biggest I've ever been to. Disney, how many do you have there?
A little under 3,000, I think.
3,000, and then we were in Nashville this year.
Yeah.
No, I didn't get to see Nicole Kidman while I was there. The Keith Urban didn't perform, but you actually got to interview Arianna Huffington, didn't you, about Thrive?
That's right.
Yeah. Any key tips there? I mean, Jamila talked a little bit about resilience and.
Well, I'll answer that question, but I just have to say, what an amazing talk. And I'm a little embarrassed to be up here after her, honestly. But going back to what Gus said about resources versus resourcefulness, have you ever heard a better example than that? That was unbelievable. And the other amazing thing was that sense of joy she has.
I know, that smile.
It's astonishing, that sense of, she didn't feel entitled or victimized I mean, she talked about the guy leaving her and laughed about it. I'm sure she's better off, but I mean, that's amazing. And so I mean, what an amazing example for all of us. So Arianna Huffington in some ways is like Jamila. Now, it doesn't come from the same background of lack of privilege, but a woman who's accomplished all these things on her own, who saw opportunity, created the opportunity for herself in a male-dominated world. As you know, she serves on the board of Uber, was instrumental in fixing the culture there, right, replacing Travis Kalanick as CEO and getting the new CEO, Derek Ostrowski, installed, and understanding that engineering culture had to change. So transformation there, really important, in a company that's about to go public at $120 billion valuation. And then started Thrive. And Thrive is all about this idea of, it's similar to what we've heard from others, being the best version of yourself. You know, the idea that you mentioned it, one social media profile for your private life and another for your public life. That doesn't work, I don't think, nor does it work that you leave your problems at home, that you the issues you have in your personal life, and when you walk in the office, you know, they're not with you anymore. No, they're still with you, of course. They impact your ability to do work. And so her message is all about realizing that, creating space to be the best person you can be, the best version of yourself, which is a phrase that Jamila used, and then go from that. And then building on strengths. I think that's a really important message, knowing your strengths and building on them.
And I think, too, just your energy levels and where you get your energy from, because, I mean, I know in my 30s I thought it was a sprint, and then as you get into, well, I'm 32 now, so it's not a big problem, but, do you know, it is actually a marathon, and if you want to stay at the top of your game for a long time, you do have to be match fit, and you do have to look at where you get your energy from, and particularly when you're travelling around the world and how you manage that and stay energized. So, I think she's onto something. And she's also quite interesting in that she's always sort of ahead of the game with the trends. You know, Huffington Post is always the first to pick up on trends. This whole idea of energy is one. Now, talking about energy, moving on to something a little depressing. When we were in Disneyland, in La La Land, you really talked a lot, and we continue to talk about the automation of the profession. And I think you said, Tom, you're on the record, if you're the steward of a process, then your job will inevitably be automated. So do you want to sort of explore that a bit? And I guess just how you see...
Expound on my dark theme? Okay, great.
Well, first of all, let's look at what's happened in the last decade. How do you think the profession has changed in the last 10 years?
Well, we had a chat over the morning break with someone about this too. I have the benefit, I suppose, and also the disadvantage of coming to the field from outside the field. I didn't grow up in procurement. So I saw this corporate function dealing with these critical business issues. From my point of view, you're dealing with issues like unfair labor practices around the world, environmental stewardship, creating social impact when you're opening up new country markets. And I thought, well, that's a pretty exciting agenda. I would like to be a part of that. So I think in another area, and sort of the flip side of that, with a function more than any other function, I can give you statistics, and I'll try not to do that too much, but one quick statistic to set the stage. In 1970, if you looked at the companies, the 500 companies that made the S&P 500, 50% of their cost structure was spent outside the firm. Today, it's more than 85%, right? And that's a massive change, right? That's what, a 70% change in cost structure over that 40, almost 50-year period. And the CPO, by the way, typically manages more than 85% of that 80%. So the CPO is sitting on more than 64% of the cost structure of the firm. I don't know if that's not strategic, I don't know what is, right? And that's because we're less vertically integrated. We're relying on our ecosystems and our business partners to be critical to the success of our business, right? The business model's entirely shifted, and we can't be successful without our suppliers. So how has the profession changed? Well, that massive change in how we run our businesses strategically was the precursor. And the second thing, and this is critically important, is there's no success for the firm without the success of the entire network. And you think about that and how it manifests itself, one of the ways is risk. I'm familiar with many examples, I'm sure many of you are too. There's a bad headline involving a supply chain somewhere in the world. What does the CEO do? He goes down to the CPO's office and said, how did this get into my supply chain? Right? And an acceptable answer is, I don't know. Right?
Or remember when you told me to fire those 100 people?
Well, so great companies get ahead of that. So Nestle, to its credit, you probably read that, they went deep into the Purina as one of their brands, the pet food brand, and deep into their supply chain, they found forced labor in Thai fishing fleets, right? And they said, we're getting ahead of that. Now that we know that's an issue, and guess what? They get credit with the consumer and the customer for that. It's when it gets discovered after the fact, right? Intel famously got ahead of the conflict minerals issue in Western Africa and became a conflict-free company, when that was a pretty bold thing to be able to say. So getting ahead of the curve, really, really important. And those are the kinds of issues, honestly, your CEO and the board isn't thinking very much about cost reduction. And I could give you a whole other talk about how that never seems to materialize in the financial statements and why is that. But what they do care about is those sort of brand disrupting events. And my kids are all so-called millennials now. They are very unforgiving in who they decide to do business with. If you mess up in their eyes, they change and they won't come back. So I mean that's existential for companies. And more than any other function, the CPO, he or she is responsible for that relationship with the ecosystem. So the stakes couldn't be higher as far as I'm concerned.
Well, that raises the question of this Procure with Purpose movement that SAP Ariba's here today, driving that, and the whole idea of social procurement and sustainability. Is it a hot issue now? Is it going to be a fly-by-night issue? Because I know here in Australia we've been talking about it for quite some time, but it really does seem to have momentum at the moment.
I think things have changed there. I mean, first of all, ISM, I'm proud of our history because we were among the first organizations to put CSR really on the agenda for companies. And, I think if we're honest with ourselves, we would say that CSR, when it first began to become something companies talked about, cynically, it was a little bit of a PR thing. It was kind of how to smooth the edges of the company and have a good story to tell. It's not that anymore. Because it is existential, because your customers will walk away, because the mores and values and norms that people have when they make a decision to transact with a company are not just about price. They're about, can I get behind a company I love is Patagonia, by the way. So if you know that company, they walk their values. So they're about environmental stewardship and adventure, and they happen to make some really expensive but functional clothing that you can wear when you're doing those things. If you buy a cotton T-shirt from Patagonia, it might cost you $30, $30 US, so a little more than here. You can go to Target or Walmart and buy a T-shirt for $5. So why would anybody in the right mind spend $35 on a T-shirt? And it's not because of the logo. It's because they've invented a toxic-free manufacturing process that produces the cotton without putting all those chemicals into the environment. And so customers say, you know what? I like that. I want to support that. Even though I'm spending more, I'm supporting a process that's environmentally friendly. And and by the way, I mean, my daughter must have bought something when I was not looking, because I get these catalogs at home now. If you've ever seen a Patagonia catalog, it's 24 or 32 pages of magazine quality journalism, amazing photographs, adventure stories, and where's the opportunity to buy anything? On the back page, they'll say, oh, here's some of the products you might have seen. But when you're becoming a customer of that company, you're doing so because you feel like you're joining a community with shared values, right? And then you're buying a good product that works. How many of us are building companies around the idea that we're a community of shared values, and then I get this product or service because I trust you as a brand? I think that's where business is moving. And that's why CSR is so important.
Well, maybe that'll be part of our community's culture
Yeah.
and the
Yeah.
global procurement professions, is that we do procure with purpose. And I think, the idea of intelligent spend too, it's obviously not just best price, it's best value, but all these other variables too that are becoming increasingly difficult to track. And funnily enough, I think that some of the robotics and the AI is actually going to help us be more human in our purchasing decisions, because there's multi-variables, we need transparency.
I couldn't agree with that more. And you talked about humanness in your opening remarks.
Is that even a word? I don't know.
I think it's a great word. It's different than humanity. I think it's different for the right reasons. I've got a couple of slides. We don't need to go into that if we don't want to. But the point is that as technology changes the profession, and I'm not a technology hype person, so I talk about technologies that are right here, right now, that are actually affecting practice, like procure-to-pay software solutions and robotics process automation are the first two near-term ones that are real and companies are working on. As they change the work we do and take the mundane stuff, and we don't have to do that anymore, we inevitably get focused on the things that actually matter the most. And in the research we've done, it turns out that a lot of if you look at a traditional source to settle process, especially the final stuff in the settlement phase, it's all automated now. It's all fintech solutions. What remains is in the front end of the process, which is actually where most of the value is. Identifying what the solutions are with your stakeholders.
We better put up your slide.
If
It's
you
really
want to.
depressing. Yeah.
Okay.
We've got it up.
I
Is
think
it
it's
the next
liberating. Okay, here it comes. Let's flip to the next ones.
Okay then.
Yeah, we don't need.
This is officially a presentation.
This
now,
is my
PowerPoint.
Michelangelo slide. Remember the
okay.
Sistine Chapel? Okay, keep moving.
Well, do you
right.
want to talk to this? So we've gone
we'll
off piste again.
Yeah,
We're
well,
not on the.
let's just get to the 5 columns, because everyone will recognize the process. This is just the ones that ISM defines, but you all might have a version of this, right? You might use different labels, but some of the steps might be different or a different process. But essentially, this is the source to settle process, as most of us understand it. And what we've done on the next slide is we've just arranged them. Each of those discrete steps is represented on this little scatter plot. And the process that is most automatable, that's what automation quotient means, is in the lower left-hand corner of this chart, right? So it's the most tactical, it's the most transactional. And the top right, the most strategic, most transformational of those tasks in that process is up there, and everything is arrayed in between, right? So if you look at the advent of technology, if you advance the slide, this is about as cute as I get, I'm sorry. P2P and RPA. We can get into a slide in a second. P2P, we've got data that shows that 67% of the procure-to-pay process in most large companies is fully automated today, right? So if that isn't the case in your company, you're behind the curve. And so that's happening. RPA, other research that we've done shows that 30% of larger firms have active RPA pilots in place. So that's going to be in place in the next year or two. And by the way, an interesting job in procurement will be the person who's now sort of an algorithm specialist and gets to fine-tune the RPA applications, because as your business shifts, your assumptions about the algorithm that underlies the RPA technology will need to be calibrated. So there's going to be a job in procurement for someone who understands data analytics, algorithms, and the procurement process. If you do the next phase, 2 technologies that are already in place, machine learning, I can talk about applications of that are real, and the Internet of Things make this next middle layer go away. So if you go to the last slide, and by the way, I'm giving us 12 years between 2018 and 2030 to fully implement just those 4 technologies. you're left with these last pieces. So the next slide shows you simply that same process. The ones that are highlighted here, I think if we can advance that, there we are. The ones that stand out are effectively the steps that will remain after 12 years of this technology wave that we're going to go through. And they're the ones, I would argue, that are the value add processes, where we have to talk to our stakeholders, identify requirements, understand risk management, manage supplier relationships, because whenever there's a problem, you all know this, whenever there's a problem with a supplier, it requires a face-to-face conversation. It's not just a scorecard. You have to sit down and say, we're having this quality issue, this delivery issue, we have a pricing issue, whatever it might be. We need to talk about it. And all that requires the humanness, the judgment, the business acumen. So what I would argue is that this is not depressing. This is actually the stuff that delivers the most value. And frankly, it's the most fun stuff to do. I'd much rather be in a conversation with someone talking about a situation. I love what Gus said. Let's not talk about the business problems. Let's talk about the problems the customer has, right? That's a great frame of reference. I'd much rather have those interesting strategic conversations than, cranking out the purchase orders, which is going to go away. So anyway, that's our view of how things are going to change. I think that's realistic and pragmatic. It isn't, we're not talking about, with all due respect to Jamila, blockchain. I think its time will come, but it's not here yet. So that's why we haven't talked about it in our presentation. I think we're still figuring out how that's going to apply. And maybe that will become more evident over the next half a decade or so.
I'm more upbeat about blockchain. We had the same feedback in Chicago, didn't we? We were in Chicago at a roundtable with all the large consulting firms. They were very down on blockchain, but you go to Europe and everyone's very upbeat. So we'll have to see who wins. I think it's a no-brainer, but...
Well, I think there are a couple of obvious use cases right now, but they're just the two first ones. One is chain of custody type applications. You follow progression
like
of
the
stuff.
Walmart one that IBM's just...
that's right.
They have the food safety.
And smart contracts. I know IBM is doing a lot in this smart contracts area. I think that's going to be another application. But the critical issue is two critical issues with blockchain. One is it requires a big community to adopt it. So you can't do like point solutions because there's no value unless you've got a big community. And second of all, honestly, the amount of computing power that's required to execute a massive blockchain solution, well, we haven't solved for that yet. We physically don't have enough energy to produce blockchain at scale yet. So.
Anyway, we won't have a fight, but I'd say that ocean freight and the food supply chain in the US are two large ones. But let's talk about your mastery model. That's obviously something that's at the core of the ISM membership. Will the mastery model support all of these?
Yeah.
That's the free question, basically, to plug ISM.
So we have this competency model that was built by practitioners. So ISM has 50,000 members. We're almost exclusively private sector procurement focused, so not very much public sector exposure. And the volunteers we brought in said, this is what you need to know. By the way, it applies across...
They weren't lab rats, were they?
They were not lab rats. They were real people. And the best thing is they weren't academics or consultants, so all due respect. People actually do the work for a living. And they said, this is what you need to know. 16 competencies at the highest level. And of course, the mix of competencies changes as you move from an entry-level person to a more senior role. The kinds of things you need to do and are expected to be able to accomplish are different. And so all of this nests within that competency model. So yeah, I think the mix will change, and that's why we refresh the model every 2 years. But fundamentally, the key things you need to understand around business acumen and stakeholder management and risk management and financial acumen, none of that goes away.
And can people in Australia do all that online?
Yeah, they go to the website. You can see the mastery model. I highly recommend. Companies typically use it to assess their teams, so they understand what is required for this team to move from this level of performance to this next level of performance to support the business. And then they can assess the team and identify any gaps and work with the faculty or other great organizations to remedy the gaps. But that's how it's used.
Is anyone here a member of ISM? Anyone here a member of CPSEM? Oh, okay. There's only really, not many professional associations.
Well, we're in a Commonwealth country, and CPSEM does a great job. I'm not
But I
surprised.
think the thing, there's people who aren't a member of either.
Yeah.
That was the findings there. So what is the big difference between the CIT certification and the ISM?
Well, I'm probably going to get in trouble here, but...
No, well, there's only 5 CPSEM members, that's why I asked.
So
There are no wrong answers.
The CPSM, right, our credential, and the MSIPs are often seen as the two de facto standards in the profession across the globe, and I think that's fair. To my mind, the MSIPs grew up out of the English education system, it is literally the equivalent of a 3-year university degree, and it establishes, you actually sit down and take written exams like you would in the university in a blue book, and you get through that process, which is a multi-year process, and you've got this credential that says you understand the field of procurement, now go off and get a job. The CPSM was designed for a different purpose. I'm not at all devaluing what the MSIP stands for, but the CPSM is designed to measure competency for a professional who's been in the field about 8 to 10 years. Again, like the mastery model, that was built through a rigorous process called the job task analysis. So we actually asked people in this room, and probably some of these people in the room provided us with data, because we have data from 50 countries and 720,000 data points. What do you need to know to do the job effectively? Then those knowledge domains are then divided according to weights that the profession tells us, and we build a psychometrically validated exam against those knowledge domains. And we test not only for recognition and recall of the concepts, so yeah, I can tell you what it is, or I can memorize the definition, but we also test for application. So if you pass that test, we know for a fact that based on your worldwide community of peers, you know the stuff that you need to know, and you can apply it. So the CPSM is built a little bit different. It's not an academic degree. It's not kind of a one and done thing, and there's a continuing education requirement too to maintain it. So I think the value for employers, managers, and for people who own it is you're committed to lifelong learning.
So looking at career progression, how do you think that people in the room here today can transform their careers, maybe if they're tactical to strategic, certification part of that? What about leadership development, soft skills? What's your advice?
They heard a couple of themes. I love Jamila's advice about make yourself useful. Gus had a theme in his talk about not being afraid of taking a non-traditional path. I mean, let's be honest, a lot of people in procurement are comfortable with a well-defined, process-oriented job, and that's great. But if you want to, or if you have dreams of developing beyond that, the number one thing you have to be comfortable with is ambiguity, and the second thing you have to be comfortable with is risk. It's risky to take another job. It's risky to volunteer for an assignment. I've had times in my career where everyone else had the good sense to take a step back when I was only one left in the front of the line stepping forward, right? But I always looked at them as opportunities. I wasn't afraid to learn. I had enough self-confidence that I could figure it out. And that's what it takes. The other thing, and a good friend of mine, Shelley Stewart, who just retired as the CPO of DuPont, he coined a phrase called lateral learning. He recommends that we don't think about moving up one rung at the ladder at a time, but take jobs in adjacent disciplines and learn the business horizontally, understand how the parts interrelate. I agree with this because it's the path that I took too, coincidentally. But all of a sudden, when you can see how this suggested solution or this course of action affects the entire business, not just your piece of it, that makes your answer more valuable, right? Than a specialist's answer says, "Wait, hold on, we can't do that because there's an accounting issue that's going to be presented." Well, if you can see it bigger than just an accounting obstacle, but an opportunity for the entire business, that's a more valuable answer. So that would be my advice.
The example about Shelley Stewart reminds me of the amazing board you have. I mean, you have some of the US's leading CPOs on your board. What are the leadership traits?
We'll be recruiting to my next year if you want to.
What are the leadership traits that you see that are common to these people who are making it to the top of their organisations? And that reminds me, you had a really great stat on women in procurement too, which
I can share that.
Yeah, I can't forget that. But what are you seeing? I mean, who are the companies on your board?
Right now, let's see. We've got
Starbucks still?
Dow DuPont.
Yep.
He just left. Hans Malat, the head of supply chain at Starbucks, just rolled off. CPO of MGM Resorts. The CPO.
Twitter or Google?
We have
Pinterest.
Pinterest. If you guys know Pinterest down here, do you know Pinterest?
Yep.
Great site. CPO of Pinterest. I can't remember off the top of my head. General Motors. BE Aerospace, which is a supplier into the aerospace industry.
Yeah, so huge
GE
organisations.
Aviation, yeah, big organizations.
So is there some common traits or profile to those leaders that you're seeing that we can all learn from?
They see the bigger picture. They don't really see themselves as someone who's the pinnacle of their achievement is to get to that corner office. They were motivated to get to the corner office because of the impact they wanted to have in a broader way. So they weren't settling for, I won, congratulations, I worked hard and I got to the place I wanted to be. It's sort of like the junior accounts payable person dreaming of becoming CFO one day because they're going to work their way up, right? Or an HR generalist moving up to become the CHRO. Actually, the people who get those C-level jobs didn't necessarily aspire to work their way up through the ranks to get those jobs. They had a bigger, and the reason they got those jobs is they had a bigger vision of the business. They had a strategic vision of the industry they're competing in, and that's why they won those roles. So that's what I think. The best of the best clearly have that ability to, and then the other piece, to pick up on what Tomei said, it's all about people at that leadership level. It really is about, no one asks me to create pivot tables anymore, which is good because I wasn't very good at it. But, strategy, vision, influencing, persuasion, communication. You're not a leader if you don't have followers, right? Those are the things that matter and all of those people at that level have mastered and by the way, I don't like to refer to them as soft skills. I think they're teachable, learnable, and real hard skills that sets leaders apart from everyone else.
And the statistic, female CPOs are earning more than their male counterparts
This
or
is
something
true.
like that?
This is true. We've broken the glass ceiling. On average, female CPOs, and this I guess is mostly United States data, earn more, both in base compensation and incentive compensation, and if you're a public company on the equity side, than their male counterparts. So that's really great news. It means that you don't have to take a back seat to anybody. Yeah.
I love it. Now, of course, Tom and I have recorded a series of podcasts, haven't we? Tuesdays with Tom. I don't know if anyone's downloaded them, but we had a lot of fun doing that.
Yeah,
and
it was
thank
good.
you for agreeing to do that, because I think it is important that everyone can hear from the leaders in our profession. And obviously, these podcasts are downloadable wherever you are. We cover a lot of topics: Trump, the trade wars, tariffs, leadership, and I guess just on the leadership question, what can we do to make ourselves indispensable? And this will be your last question from me, at least.
Okay. I think I'll speak about my experience in the United States, which is what I know the best. Unfortunately, many of even the most senior leaders in our profession are too comfortable with traditional metrics around how they're adding value to the business. Cost reduction and maybe purchase price variance if you're in that end of the business, or cost avoidance, which I think is a totally
We agree on
fake
that.
statistic.
Yeah.
Wouldn't pin any of my career advancement hopes on that one. Whereas the real opportunity is to step up and say, I'm comfortable in my execution of this function in committing to hardline financial metrics that the CFO can see. So even if I know I'm saving money over here, but it's being reallocated into this part of the business, so I can't see cost reduction on the P&L, understand where that money is migrated and the strategic opportunity it's driving, and tell that story. Yeah, I saved you $10 million over here, and we use that $10 million to accomplish this strategic initiative that we haven't had funding for. That's a really important story. Being able to point to how you can drive earnings per share. There's a great example from Ford Motor Company. Bob Shanks, the CFO, on an earnings call was asked about the procurement function at Ford, and could they continue to expect to see, the analyst community on Wall Street was asking, can we expect to continue to see Ford deliver these great quarter after quarter improved savings? And he said, well, we're really good at Ford, I'm proud of that, and then he pivoted. But I would focus you on the procurement team who brought us the Sync entertainment and entertainment and navigation system. And anybody own a Ford down here? So you're probably familiar with it.
We don't manufacture them, but we drive them.
So it turns
A lot
out
of Mustangs, actually.
Okay, there you go. As consumers, we're very happy to pay for those things that we value, and it turns out we value entertainment and navigation. Without that, in absolute terms, the cost of an automobile has declined over the last 2 decades. You're actually making less money today than you were, 20 years ago. But Bob Shanks said, but consumers are willing to pay, and so the innovation that procurement sourced and brought into Ford Motor Company is actually increasing our top line. Now that's a hard dollar metric that you need to take credit for and stand up to the opportunity to own. So I would advise you to get comfortable with the risk that comes with owning, driving value for your company, and you'll get the credit for that when it happens, but the risk is that if it doesn't materialize, you're going to have to own that too. But you don't get ahead without taking some risk.
You can't make an omelette without breaking some eggs.
There you go.